very first episode of INNERVERSAL Podcast. My name is Samuel Armen. I'm a teacher and a writer, and I research psychology. And this podcast is essentially aiming to combine psychology with various subjects. So every episode is going to be psychology plus something. And today I'm with Matthew Kasabian, and together we're going to be talking about psychology and gut health. Welcome, Matt.
Sam, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to talk to you about what I went through in my journey and the psychology behind it.
Well, I'm very happy to have you, especially for our very first episode, because I think it will set a precedent. So, would you mind just giving us a little introduction to who you are and sort of your connection to gut health? Why this is an issue that you can talk to with
Yes.
a level of, we'll say,
Yes.
expertise.
So I am diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease. It's an autoimmune disease, and there are two forms of it. One of them I had in the past is called ulcerative colitis, which is when my immune system attacks my colon. So I was diagnosed with this in November of 2018, and unfortunately took a very severe turn where I had multiple severe health issues, such as not being able to live my life, being too weak to leave my own home, which led to multiple surgeries, such as having my whole entire colon removed and then having an ostomy bag. This went on for many years and trying to reverse the ostomy bag as well, as much as I did love having it. And now, after being diagnosed from 2018, currently in 2023, I had it reversed and I now have something called the J pouch, which now allows me to go to the bathroom without an ostomy bag. And now I'm living my life to the fullest. And now I'm working at the hospital NYU Langone, which is the hospital that gave me my life back.
Even that elevator pitch of a description of who you are and what you've gone through is, I think, enough to be inspiring. But I know there's even more details that are um, that I think will resonate with people across various demographics and life experiences. So let's rewind to sort of the lowest of lows in the sort of the vicissitudes of this malady. You, I believe you lost a tremendous amount of weight while there were other sort of big life changes occurring. Can you walk us through that, just so again everyone understands exactly? Because when people discuss a pathology, sometimes people just think about the physiology of it, the biology of it, and they forget all the other repercussions that are happening simultaneously, and these things interconcatenate. There's a social aspect, there's a developmental aspect, there's obviously a work aspect, and depending on your age, there's an academic aspect. So can you walk us through, I guess, one of the lowest of lows, and then we'll kind of dive into sort of the thought processes.
There was so much in my life that was intertwined, such as the academic and the social. When I was diagnosed, so a lot of the symptoms that come with ulcerative colitis is running to the bathroom uncontrollably and having bloody bowel movements and diarrhea. Because of this, and you're running so often uncontrollably, you have a lot of fatigue and you get very tired. So, along with this, I was having multiple different things going on in my life. I was right out of college. I was trying to hold on to my social life where all my friends and I are trying to be together as much as we can before going to our adult lives. Then I was in a serious relationship at the time, and the disease affected that, unfortunately. So it was trying to kind of find a balance between handling the disease and then the relationship. Then there was the academic side of it, which I just started graduate school and gained my master's in public administration. So I'm learning how to get this new course load and being in the library, studying all the time and doing papers. And a lot of this was happening at once while trying to apply for internships and learning. And a lot of it at once with this disease was, it's a lot to handle. And that's where there is a big gut and mind connection, because when you're trying to handle all of these things together in your life, your body responds in such a way in which the disease was, the stress was getting to me at times where I would be run to the bathroom. So it would be a relationship in those two. and it was difficult to handle at times, and it did progressively get worse, unfortunately, to where my body wasn't absorbing nutrients. And from November 2018 to, I would say, May, I would say March, I was at 111 pounds running to the bathroom.
Can you walk us through just the numbers again? So from November 2018 to
March of 2018, I dropped to 111, from 145 pounds to 111 pounds. And then I went up a little bit going on a holistic diet, trying to do a holistic path because I was being thrown a bunch of medications and nothing was working. So I tried a different avenue, but then I went up a little bit and it helped. But then I went back to I went from 124 pounds in May to 101 pounds.
that's extremely skinny. That's a, I mean, unbelievable
Yeah.
is probably not the right word, but I mean, you must have been emaciated and very, I assume, exhausted, especially,
Yeah.
I mean, to be at that body weight, coupled with the fact that you have this malady that's still impacting you at that weight, and with the truth that your body wasn't absorbing nutrients to help combat this kind of we'll say this weight loss, anything to help uh, give you sustenance. It must have been extremely difficult. Plus, you had a whole life in the meantime with grad school and work and a relationship and all of these things. Um, what what was going through your mind at some of the, I guess, the lowest of lows, and how did you kind of push yourself forward?
So I would say at this point in my life where I was 101 pounds, it was, I couldn't live. I was just in my room all the time. I was basically skin and bones. I was hairy all over. I didn't even have enough energy to shave my own body, and my clothes didn't even fit me. So my waistband couldn't even fit around my whole body. And then you're going to the bathroom and the shower. You're running, but you have to run back and forth, and it was exhausting.
If you had to estimate how many times you had to essentially run to the restroom, what would you approximate?
There was one point I was going about 24, 25 times a day. And that was because I had a bacterial infection from having kidney stones in the hospital in March.
That was what I was going to ask you,
Yep.
actually, if this was a comorbidity. So there's a few other physiological, or rather, physical comorbidities with ulcerative colitis, and I
Yes.
guess kidney stones is one of them.
Yes, the kidneys can be affected completely because you're not absorbing specific types of proteins. And one of these proteins I wasn't absorbing correctly, so I was getting a specific type of stone. And you get so dehydrated as someone with ulcerative colitis. So with your colon not absorbing water, because that's one of its main functions, is absorbing water through the body, I was getting stones. So when I went to the hospital, one of the bacterial infections that you can get even from the hospital, and even as an inflammatory bowel disease patient, is called C. diff, and it's a type of bacteria that grows in your colon when you have very low amounts of good bacteria, especially within patients with inflammatory bowel disease. And with this in the combination with the ulcerative colitis, I was going about 25 times a day, and it was very rough. And it's like you're in a fever dream. Like you don't even know what's going on anymore. You can't even enjoy anything what you're doing in the moment, especially at that weight. It's scary because you don't know what's going to happen.
And yet you're here,
Yep.
and you're smiling, and I mean, you look very strong, and you're very active. I know you participate in martial arts. So now, what is the, I guess the question would be, how does one bounce so high from such a malady? And if there's behavioral and cognitive aspects, please feel free.
So it came from one of the darkest moments where I it was after my relationship ended, unfortunately, and I went to the bathroom and I just looked in the mirror and I didn't see me anymore. I saw it. It was like you couldn't see yourself anymore. I saw someone who was frail, someone who was weak, someone who couldn't be independent and live anymore. And it flipped a switch in me where I thought it was unfair because I was trying everything in my power to get to where I need to be back in life. There was opportunities I missed in life, like I had an internship opportunity at United Nations. I was supposed to be an intern there and I couldn't even do it because I was so sick. And then I said, you know what? I'm coming back from this. I'm tired of this. And it flipped a switch in my head where I can't let this disease control my life anymore. I need to do more than what's expected. So I reached out to more help at a teaching hospital in the city, and I got much better care with a better doctor and a better support team with a dietitian and a social worker. Because my mental health at that point was, it needed to get stronger. And I was very positive throughout this whole entire experience, but I did have some dark moments. And this was one of those dark moments where I was going to change it to a positive. So then I went on a much stronger medication called Remicade, and which like very much suppresses your immune system, and it's an IV infusion. So I would get that, and I would be scared because it's also the unknown, because you don't know if it's going to work or not, because it's about a little bit higher 60% chance it's going to work. So the anxiety starts to creep up on you. It's like, what if this doesn't work? What's the next stage? Am I going to live? Because I'm 101 pounds. Am I going to leave my own home? I don't know, but I don't know unless I'm going to try. And I had to try and fight. So that's what I decided to do. And the Remicade worked immediately. It worked in the end of June. As soon as I got that first infusion, it started to work. And as soon as it started to work, I could do little things again, like making my bed. I could do chores. Then I added something else, like going to the gym. And even that was a mental impact on my mental health, because you would see people look at me like I was a ghost because I was so skinny I couldn't fit in my clothes. And that hurts your self confidence in a way because you don't want to be looked at that way. And I said in my head, I'm like, screw these people looking at me. I'm going to come back even stronger. I'm going to do something that no one's ever going to expect of me and get in the best shape of my life. And I was going to prove everyone wrong that looked at me differently. And it took a long time to get there because there was ups and downs along the way. But I got there years later and I'm in the best shape of my life now. It's kind of having that visualization of a goal in mind. And that's what I visualized, because I had my sister take a picture of me when I was on my lowest weight. And I said, you're going to take this picture of me. I'm going to show people where I was and where I'm going to be from now in the best shape of my life. And it's going to show how much we can accomplish as people.
I love that. I love that, and major shout out to your sister for understanding that, you know, what might maybe superficially look like a bizarre request. Hey, I'm at my worst. Take a photo.
Yeah.
And for her to have the maturity and understanding and love, of course, to understand why that's an important factor for you.
Yeah.
We were speaking earlier about the comorbidities with ulcerative colitis, and I guess with many other syndromes and pathologies involved in IBS. I guess one of the biggest psychopathologies, or you know, what one might call a mental disorder, with ulcerative colitis and IBS is anxiety, and another very common one is depression. Did you experience these? And you know, we can dive into them and sort of how they kind of operated, and you know how you trucked through each of them.
There were two big moments in my life where I felt one side of depression and one side of anxiety. And this was after a majority of my surgeries. One in the anxiety instance. In the depression instance, I had my colon removed and I was told I had to be given an ostomy. Surprisingly, I thought I just need more Remicade, but My body wasn't responding correctly. I was running to the bathroom. I was at 120 pounds again in the ER at the teaching hospital in September of 2019. And I was told by the IBD director, you need to have your colon removed. We're throwing everything at you. And then I got an ostomy. And I loved having an ostomy, but there was another part to the surgery called.
For those don't know, do you want to just mention what an ostomy is?
Yes. So an ostomy is a way that someone can go to the bathroom, whether it be through urine or through stool. This one was specifically called an ileostomy, where the surgeon takes the part of your small intestine, the end of it, and brings it to the outside of your body through your belly, right next to your belly button. And then over it, you put what's called an ostomy bag, where you put it over the small intestine, and that's where you automatically go to the bathroom. And then there's an end to the bag where you empty it out into the bathroom, and you have to change it every 2-3 days. So that's what an ostomy
And
is.
it's visible. It's
Yes,
visible.
yes. And it's a big change where you don't want to live with one because, again, it affects your self confidence because your body's never going to be the same again. And a big thing that happened in my mind as soon as I was told this was, I'm never going to be in a relationship again. And it hurts your self confidence a lot. And I was out of a relationship 3-4 months, and I said, "Is this the end?" And then I met someone named Andrew, who was my ostomy nurse, gave me the perspective to live positively through an ostomy, and he changed my whole perspective.
What exactly did he, do you think, impart to you that was so beneficial?
His goal in life was for people to master ostomy so they can live their lives to the fullest. And he imprinted that in my mind so hard, where a week after I had a major life-changing surgery, I went out to my friend's housewarming in Hoboken at 113 pounds because I said, I'm going to take my life into my own hands and I'm going to live my life and go this party because I got this ostomy to live my life. I'm not going to let it control me anymore. And I surprised all my friends there. And then he imprinted that on me. And that's a big reason why I like to spread awareness of inflammatory bowel disease is through his message. And then later on, there was a surgery called a J-pouch surgery where I have the ostomy reversed and where they take my small intestine and they basically turn it into a J within my body. So it's like a mini colon basically. So they create that and then you have like another type of ileostomy temporarily for the J-pouch to heal. And then they close up the ileostomy. So it's a two-stage surgery basically for J-pouch after having your colon removed.
It is fascinating how major physical traumas repeatedly throughout the body can occur, and the body, recovers from it. It adapts to it, and it just, I mean, it's a very impressive and for me a kind of inspiring thing. I mean, just on a quick detour, have you heard of a cabbage?
No, I haven't.
And what it basically is for people who are having bypass surgery, so their arteries are clogged. And my father had it, and you know, quite a few of his arteries were clogged. So what they have to do is they have to extract a singular vein. There's only one vein, I believe, that has the diameter and the capabilities to recapitulate how an artery moves. And it's called the saphenous vein. It's that giant vein down your leg or your legs. And they extract that. They have to cut open. Well, first they have to drill holes at your sternum, basically, and put you on a heart-lung machine that essentially mimics your cardiovascular system. Then they cut open your chest using a variety of equipment. They open up your rib cage. They cut open the net that your heart is in, called the paraambular sac, and then they start operating by putting that vein that they extract from your leg into, maybe it's a triple bypass, so it's cut into three pieces, and they bypass those clogged arteries. And after these multiple physical traumas, the body recovers. And I mean, I remember seeing people who had just undergone it, and their body swells up like a balloon because of how much inflammation is occurring simultaneously all across the
Yep.
body. And it's fascinating how much physical trauma a human body can withstand and still move around and experience a full, complete life.
You're right. It's kind of sometimes a work in progress because I had to have everything redone to me because it failed for the J pouch. And for in this instance, your body adapts. It's so incredible what you're saying about it because by doing things such as like with the heart or any type of like body part, the body can adapt to really learning how to work on its own. It figures out its own pace and it takes time, but it learns with the connection and it learns, okay, it's not going to work this way. What's going on? And it takes time, but it learns this new way of life of really connecting with what's going on. And you're able to, and hopefully at some points with with this new medical path we're on, being able to go in so many different directions of people being able to have a quality of life worth living because that is the age we're going in. Because for me, for example, that's what happened with me, and the body goes through a lot of trauma if it didn't work because that's what happened to me in my J pouch, unfortunately, in the beginning.
And just think of the decades and decades of
Yeah,
experimentation to ensure that this is successful.
yeah,
And so we're talking obviously about all the physical traumas. I think that segues
yeah.
quite seamlessly into the
That's good.
multivarious psychological
Yep,
traumas that people incur having gone through these particular scenarios.
yep,
So can you let's dive into that a little bit, and
yep.
if you'd like to talk about the depression and the anxiety, and perhaps we can dive into how one can see these things in more, I'll say, helpful ways for people to conceptualize these pathologies.
Yes,
So, but we'll start, I guess, with the sort of the psychological rumblings.
yep. This was really my darkest moment. It was after I had the J pouch surgery done in December of 2019. I was 136 pounds at this point. The surgery took a little bit quicker than usual. It's usually around 4 hours. It took about 2.5 for this one. I started throwing up bile, straight bile, green bile, a day or two after the surgery. And I left the hospital about 10 pounds less, which is a little normal for the course, but I didn't feel right. I knew I wasn't 100%. I was like, something's a little off. I started not eating as much as the weeks went on in the middle of January. I started getting very dehydrated. I started getting very sick again. It was hard. I couldn't, it was so hard to breathe. And about February, it got so bad to the point where I had to go to the ER. The doctors are trying to figure out what's going on with me. And turns out I was going to the bathroom so quick out of my temporary ileostomy at the time that my body couldn't absorb any nutrients at all. So I was having bile come out of my stomach, my ileostomy, and I was throwing up bile at the same time. And I was in the hospital for
Because
about
you
2
weren't
weeks
absorbing anything.
because it was going through me so quick. It was like there was fire, an actual fire in my chest, lighting up my throat. Then you're throwing up constantly. You can't even breathe. It was so hard because I was so dehydrated. I was passing so many kidney stones at this point. My hair's falling out of my head and I was dropping weight rapidly again. I had to go on TPN, total partial nutrition. Have you heard of that before? I had, and
I haven't.
so it's basically an IV of how you get nutrition, your calories. It's through an IV. So I couldn't even eat and I was getting an IV. And at this point, I was one day specifically, one of my friends asked me to come visit me in the hospital. And I said, this isn't a good day to come because I'm very sick. And once again, they're trying to figure out what's going on with me, see if I have gallstones or anything. If there's a twisted intestine in me, if I have obstruction, I start throwing up again. And my nurse, Lily, who was a godsend, was right next to me when it happened. And I just started to break down crying because I said, I can't do this anymore. I've tried every route of trying to get better. This has been going on for over a year. I tried the medication. It didn't work. I tried to take this to my own hands with holistic diet and a coach. It didn't work. I tried stronger medication. It didn't work. I tried surgery. It didn't work. And then I tried this next surgery. It's not working. And I felt so defeated because after all those, when I would start to get better throughout those moments in my life, I came crashing down. Like when I started to gain weight again at one point, when the Remicade worked, came crashing down. Holistic diet got better, crashing down. After getting the ileostomy, it crashed down. And then it happened again. I crashed down. And I was defeated, defeated.
It almost makes you not trust positivity.
I
It
didn't
makes you
choose.
almost not trust any sort of
Yep.
beneficial moment.
And I felt like I deserved the negativity because 99% of this whole journey, I was so positive. And this was one of the only times I was very negative. And it got very dark to the point where I couldn't live anymore in the hospital. And I said to myself, if I died tomorrow, I'd be okay because I can't do this anymore. It's really, and it was really a dark moment in my life where I just couldn't do it anymore. And I didn't know what to do anymore. And Sam, when we're in those dark moments, like what do you think the depression, it, when someone gets to that type of point, what do you think can like really help someone get out of that? Because for me, I was gracefully found new help and I kind of stuck with it and found my way eventually. But this is kind of a loaded question. Like there's different multitudes of really us getting into that dark place. How do you think we can like overcome those with that type of depression?
So one of the pioneers of what became known as positive psychology, his name is Martin Seligman. He in his I believe it's his most recent book. It's called Flourish. So he identified, and this is not necessarily about happiness, but rather subjective well-being. It's the idea of what makes someone um, sort of not just resilient, but thriving. And he outlined five different elements. And it could be abbreviated as PERMA, PERMA, and it is positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. And each of these five elements, if you really think about it, they're the most necessitous things for just waking up the next day, even if you're in a good or great or amazing state. And just to reiterate, positive psychology isn't about fighting depression, but rather you think of the human, we'll call it the scale of moods as -10 being at the highest level of suicidality or extreme depression. And then on +10, you have we'll call it a almost a self-actualized happiness and filled with purpose and joy and satisfaction in life. Not that everything in life is perfect, but that your perception of things is one that does not, we'll say, collapse you. And it's important to use these. Everyone should could benefit from understanding these five elements. But for people with depression, it is I think even more essential to understand these things. I mean, in one of the longest studies ever done, is it's done through Harvard. It's actually a beautiful study. It's a little over 80 years long. They measured the well-being. They measured the well-being of graduates from Harvard, and they found that the singular most impactful um, element for predicting subjective well-being, what we can again reductively call happiness, was social relationships. Were they having relationships? Did they have friends, a community? Were they in touch with their family? Were they in an intimate relationship? These were things that predicted happiness and, or again, more specifically, subjective well-being beyond everything. And you think of, you can extrapolate this in so many different ways. But of course, positive emotions, understanding the things that make you happy uh, is essential. And one of the things I tell people when they're going through a bad time, or when they are, and not going through a bad time, maybe just internally, but maybe there's life events that are causing negativities, distress. I always tell them, name your three most common negative emotions, and from that starting point of identification, try and figure out ways to work with them. So, uh, a few years ago, when I was experiencing panic disorder, which lasted about 8 months, I had to figure out a way to deal with panic. How do I deal with panic? With some people who have a difficulty with rage, they have to find an outlet to expunge that rage, to funnel it into something productive. And the term for this, by the way, is sublimation. For people who are uh, experiencing depression, and this is again a problem. Some people think of depression as just extreme sadness, which is not what it is at all. It's closer to an emptiness than sadness. And conversely, mania or manic is, instead of happiness, it's over inundation, if you will, which is why people who are manic tend to sort of, we'll say, break the rules of themselves. They tend to do things outside of their own character, to be more specific, beyond their own character. Um, so ensuring that you have something that you can fight against when you're in depression, when you're experiencing all of these things that make you feel useless, arming yourself with an arsenal of mechanisms that provide you meaning. Perhaps it's religion. I mean, there's another correlation between people who come out of depression and their religiosity. And and this might be a controversial statement, but religion can be the the PhD that you're working on. That is, of course, part of the anxiety you're experiencing, perhaps, um, or it can be the particular movie franchise that you are so excited about, uh, every episode or film or whatever it is. So meaning can obviously be established in a multitude of ways. And I think one of the best books I've ever read on psychology. Let's see, it's right, hopefully behind me. I give my books away too often. Uh, it's called Man's Search for Meaning. Have you heard of it?
I haven't heard of it.
So it's by Viktor Frankl, who is a Holocaust survivor, and he was a psychologist prior to being sent to a concentration camp, and he has such a beautiful statement. He said, "In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice." And it's such a, if anyone said it, of course it would sound profound, but for someone to have gone through the Holocaust and lost everyone they loved, and to develop a whole form of therapy for it is very telling. And his form of therapy is considered it became known as logotherapy, or therapy through meaning. And it's extremely important. And people can develop meaning from a variety of things, whether you start to fall in love with poetry and now you want to be a published author, or you see someone go on a weight loss journey or a weight gain journey, and you're inspired, maybe even a little competitive. That could be the thing that provides you meaning. But it's important to understand, it's not that you're not suffering anymore, but rather your suffering now has the context, a broader context that makes it something that doesn't erase you, that doesn't deteriorate who you are. And that's so essential, because that creates that integrity. And I mean integrity from like almost a geologic perspective. It's that core nucleus of who you are that is maybe shakeable a little bit, but it will not fracture. Um, and he said he wrote Man's Search for Meaning in 1946, and about 2,300 years prior, Aristotle wrote, "Suffering becomes beautiful when anyone bears great calamities with cheerfulness, not through insensibility, but through greatness of mind. And it's that same idea. We've known this for a while, that if the world is crumbling, or if you are you're walking through a, we'll call it a metaphoric earthquake, as long as you have these mechanisms to ground yourselves or keep yourself buoyant during a flood, I'm just cycling through metaphors right now, then you have a greater likelihood of emerging on the other side, and much more powerful for having gone through those particular struggles.
That everything you just said is pretty much how I got through that episode, or just in general, the darkest moments of my life. What I told myself, I wanted to turn this into a positive, and I wanted to have the meaning of showing others what I went through and to spreading awareness of this disease, showing people you can live life with an ostomy, you can live life with this disease and still have a great time and still enjoy life to the fullest. And then the other big piece of it was the meanings in the relationships was so was pretty much my main was one of my pillars. I talk about these pillars in my life is how I got through this this whole entire phase of this whole entire chapter. What the biggest one was my family and friends. My family, my mother, my dad, my sister, my brother, they all helped me so much. My sister's boyfriend, they were there for me every step of the way. My best friends from college and out of college, they were there for me every single step of the way, supporting me, being there for me, asking me how I was doing, visiting me while I was home. They would visit me while I was at my house, and because I was too sick
You
to
almost get
leave.
overwhelmed, right?
Yeah, it was over. It was in a good
Right.
way, but it's a lot at times because it's like you feel the love, you really feel that love, and it makes you have that meaning. When I came back home from that moment from having those complications, this is February 2020 at this point, right before COVID hit. It was a week before COVID hit. I got a surprise visit from my friends on my birthday, the day after my birthday. They all just surprised entered my room, and I was 105 pounds at this point. I was like, "What are you guys doing here?" They're like, "We're here for your birthday. We're here to surprise you. We're here to hang out with you." And they were all there, and it makes you feel so loved after not having that meeting. And they helped fill that void so much, and nothing can replace
I
that.
know some people who occasionally react, at least temporarily, negatively to that. And if you think about it, you can actually kind of trace it a little bit.
Mm,
I think almost all human behaviors you can trace, as long as you're using enough lenses.
yeah.
Um, and it the feeling of being overwhelmed with people considering you as worthy to visit, it's so rooted in you feeling like your worth is not equivalent, is inferior to the worth they're bestowing upon you for
Hmm.
having visited. And
Yeah.
it gives you this, it's not necessarily imposter syndrome, because you're not necessarily actively being in a position, but you do feel inadequate to the magnitude of love you're receiving
Hmm.
or care you're receiving. And it's interesting. And I just want to remind anyone who has ever felt that way, um, people are making their decisions. They're making their decision to come visit you. They're making their decision to call you. They're making their decision to reach out to you, to trust you, to even speak to you, and maybe even send you a message every now and then. So instead of thinking, oh, this person feels bad for me, or like, or even like, oh, I'm not worth discussing, or I'm not worth visiting, remember that they had made that decision. Whatever the equation in their mind was, maybe some portion of it is sympathy. Maybe it's empathy. Maybe they had gone through something distantly similar, and they know what that feeling is like and how important that one text can be. So I just want to remind people to, when you're overwhelmed by positivity, and you're getting that sense of I don't deserve all this goodness. I mean, you likely do, because other people coming to visit you is that appraisal.
Yeah, when you just mentioned, it actually relates to the most anxious time I had on my journey in that moment. Because with my friends, I'll speak about it a little bit later, but you know, they were all living their lives. They were all doing that while I was sick. And when they were there to be there with me, it felt great because, one of my best friends was in law school at the time. He's studying so much. His time is devoted to doing other things. And as well as my other friends, they were starting businesses or they were just getting their foot in the ground, starting work and full-time jobs, moving out. They still showed that love and care by coming to visit me or be there for me. And it makes you feel so appreciated. And that's something that you really need when you go through those times because when you're alone because when you're that sick, you're very alone. I was only with my family at the time, and my mom was an angel, God sent, just being there for me, helping. Like I couldn't even go out downstairs get food. She'd bring up my meals, and she would be the only person, or my brother or my sister, that I would see. But it's good to feel appreciated outside of that, and that's what my friends gave me. And that was a kind of like a pill. That was the strongest pillar of all of them, and that's always something that I always appreciate is that friendships is something very important to me.
Before you dive into the anxiety part, I mentioned the positivity of having relationships. This might be obvious for some people, but there's obviously a negativity associated with not
Yes.
having relationships. And this doesn't have to do with introversion or extroversion. Of course, the magnitude or the quantity of the relationships and the quality of relationships change based on your introversion and extroversion. For some people who are introverted, a a calmer, singular discussion with people, with a person, is adequate. And for someone who's an extrovert, they might be at a cafe with one person, but they want to talk to everyone. And the best way to conceptualize introversion and extroversion is, how do you recharge? With extroverts, they recharge through social interactions,
Yeah.
and generally are depleted in more individual or isolated environments. And
Mhm.
people who are introverted, they get exhausted in large groups, in very social settings. But that doesn't mean that they ought to be alone all the time, because we are not constructed that way.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've actually seen it from people who have been in solitary confinement. There, for people who have been imprisoned, being in solitary confinement has been correlated to I forgot the exact number, but it was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was more than 3 times higher chance of suicidality
Wow.
just for experiencing solitary confinement.
I,
And this is different, of course, from those who choose to isolate in the woods for a week, because that's on your own terms. Of course, unpredictability is an exacerbator of any emotion. And when you're in a prison with no food, it's a hard floor, and it's not a large room, and you're just by yourself experiencing life moving forward while you're stagnant, is just a massive detriment on your health,
it shows you
anyone's
how
health.
it shows you just how important and necessary these relationships are, whether you're introvert or extrovert. I think that do you think it's necessary for someone for an introvert to have those relationships even though they spend those times alone? Because I do know some people that really don't really like that interaction, but I feel like it's so necessary to have that because it's such a powerful meaning in people. And I know our alone time, everyone needs alone time, but I feel like too much alone time isn't good. But can people strive off of that, do you think, and still be successful? Do you think?
So there's this concept of essentially integration, the multiple facets of your personality, of your experiences, of your day, that are sort of a loose, maybe not loosely, but they're in an associated fuzz. When you have a conversation with someone, you tend to integrate things, because you take the abstractions of your ideas, and when you articulate them, you obviously have to put them in some sort of sequence of sounds and words and ideas that will be able to transcend from your experience to the experience of the recipient, right?
Okay.
This is why therapy or why friendship can be a therapeutic device, of course,
Yeah.
because you have to actually think about how you would articulate something, and that helps you master it.
Yeah.
And this is the very obvious secret that, I think should be more frequently or more commonly understood. Um, Being alone allows you to integrate as well, but you integrate all these experiences that you had. Because how could you possibly integrate all these different social experiences when you haven't had a moment to step out of them and to sort of have that moment where you actively put the picture together
Yeah.
of what you've just experienced, what you've just learned, what you've just unlearned, whatever it is, or the emotions that you rode in those moments. And of course, again, an introvert would be, very sensitive to that, of course, but uh, both can benefit from isolation, as long as it's self-directed isolation, of course, and both necessitates human interaction, very much so.
Yeah.
We don't develop properly without having interactions.
Yeah. I agree. I agree 100% because no matter the experiences, whether them be positive or negative in our lives, like this one was a negative, obviously, but you learn from it and you can turn it into a positive in a way and learn things about yourself that you never knew before. Like I didn't know, like when I was in high school, I was such a skinny guy. I was 111 pounds normally, like, and that was a normal weight for me. And I was really skinny. But I always imagined myself, what if I was like a lot stronger? Like, what if I was like went to the gym and started like working out and had more muscle. And I started to do that as I went to high school and like into high school and college, and I did get muscle. But to take it a step further where I got into the best shape of my life, I never thought that would be possible if I wasn't so determined and put my mind to it from the experience that I had. It was the necessary motivation and determination. So it teaches you can go above and beyond and push past your limits with appropriate help. It just teaches you that you're more capable of than what you already think of yourself and teaches you to believe in yourself also. I think that's so vital.
Right. I mean, that's part of that post-traumatic growth.
Yep.
The idea. So one of the I think one of the best ways to understand the human mind is to think of it as an ocean, and the surface of the waves. This is how I've conceptualized this. I conceptualized this in 2014, so almost 10 years ago. So you picture the surface of the waves. You're looking down. It's an aerial view at the ocean. Okay. When you're looking down at the ocean, the waves on the very top, that is your immediate thoughts. Those are the thoughts that you have direct access to. Like right now, you're thinking about the words I'm saying. Maybe you're thinking about how you are reacting to some of these ideas. Maybe you're thinking of the books behind me, or that we're both wearing green. Uh, in either case, these are the superficial, meaning on the surface thoughts. Then you plunge into these waves, and the lower you go, the more subconscious it is. And of course, there's levels of the subconscious, meaning it is currently not a conscious thought. Now, if I say a particular thing, if I mention Breaking Bad, the waves start to ripple a little bit, and new ideas are coming up because you have these connections. These connections are called associations. Okay, they are the closeness or the proximity between these patterns of waves. So um, Mozart is connected to perhaps classical music, is connected to music, is connected to rock, is connected, and these things sort of ripple out, right? Trauma is, in my sort of conceptualization, trauma is where something violates the balance of that ocean so much so that the associations have that many associations have become untethered. They have become detached. It has broken the rules of your mental ocean. And the negativity of that is obviously apparent. You are in a uncontrolled state. You're in a state where there's no sense of meaning, and meaning in a less in a spiritual way, in the way in which we were discussing it, but meaning as in definitions of what are boundaries, what is and what isn't. And when that happens, of course, much of this informs your identity. So your self identity is rippled, and that's very problematic, of course. And with that, you might lose the integrity that even keeps you alive. So it is the negativities of trauma are immediately apparent. But with trauma, you also, because of that rippling, because of that fissure of your self identity, because of the fact that these associations are now loosened, you have the potential to regrow from there. And how you regrow is obviously a entirely individualized process. For It was about 30 years ago, Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun made the post-traumatic growth inventory, where they described 5 different elements in tracking how that growth happens. And it really is fascinating because a lot of it is about consciously retethering yourself, consciously reintegrating, and with we'll call it like a new type of malleability, in that because those fractures have occurred, there is a new area to understand things, including, and as fundamental as we can get, your own mortality. Understanding your own mortality is something that is an extremely painful experience for people. And when you're on the other side of that, and you've gone as close to death as possible, and you've experienced that in your 20s or your 30s or in your teens, it creates a fundamental difference in your every second of being alive. And how you come about that is part of that post-traumatic growth. And again, it might be a strange thing to see trauma as potentially loaded as potentially filled with positives, but it does need to be understood that with that sort of collapsing, there is the opportunity for new things to be built,
Yes, it's
structures, if you will.
it ripples you to the core. It changes you as a person. I would never be who I am today if it wasn't through what I went through. I never would have known what I was capable of, or beyond this career path working in healthcare. I wouldn't be spreading awareness and helping other people if it wasn't what I went through. I could have had a negative outlook on this. And because it changes you so much, some people handle it differently. And I'm not saying that everyone's going to handle trauma like mine the way I am. Everyone's going to look at it differently. That's the most important thing. Is I think that having a better outlook on this, on a traumatic event like this, can benefit you more. I'm not saying to, I'm not trying to have toxic positivity come out, but I'm saying to kind of learn from it and grow from it is where it could benefit you. Not saying not saying that I'm so glad this happened to me, but I'm glad I grew from it so much.
Yeah, instead of seeing it as, oh, they're traumatized, they're broken, you can more actively think, they had experienced trauma and they're rebuilding, because that puts the power into their hands. So in that sort of capacity, um, you're almost expecting the outcome to be eventually positive for them, relatively from where they are in that moment. There's a really good book. It has one of the best titles I've ever read. It's by Dr. Oliver Sacks. It's called "The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat." Have you heard of this book?
No, I haven't heard this one.
Beautiful book. So instead of calling disorders as disorders, or disabilities, even worse, because again, it, Well, I'll explain, but he categorizes them in different ways. So he'll call something like synesthesia, the blending of senses, where you can see taste or smell color. Not that you can, you do. You're in that perpetual state. He called that a transfer or a transport rather. So he has like losses, excesses, transports. When you use these kind of terminologies, it is so much more favorable to the individual. And of course, stigma is a huge part of all of this. But if you want someone to uh, arise from the other side of depression, or they're battling of OCD, or they're battling of any sort of um, uh, difficulty that they're enduring, it would be a smarter idea to be sort of reconceptualizing how these maladies, how these challenges, how these uh, uh, experiences are seen. And yours very much, I think, falls under that category.
Do you think that like a lot of people that go through these traumatic experiences, like for example, do you think that they should have that type of attitude that I'm having? Do you think that they should? For example, if someone were to go through a disease like I did, and I have a more positive attitude on it, I know people that don't. Like when they live with an ostomy, they hate it, which is understandable because not a lot of people can accept an ostomy because it's hard. It's a total different life change. It's a bag of stool on your body. So not a lot of people can accept that and they feel ashamed. Now, do you think that in their psychology, do you think that they could have not only change their perception to a more positive one, but do you think they have that ability? And do you think that they should? Because their life would benefit more, but not, I feel like not everybody could. It's like you can't like tell someone like, look at this better, because not everyone has that same perspective as me.
Short answer is yes. I mean, I do think, a blanket, yes. So, do people have the ability to see things more positively? Yes. Do people, or should people? Yes. How they go about it is an entirely unique process. There's this book by Dr. Robert Sapolsky called Behave. It's actually right over my
I
shoulder,
see
right
that.
there. And the book begins with, if I'm not mistaken, it begins with Dr. Robert Sapolsky sort of ninjaing into a bunker, and he finds Adolf Hitler, takes a gun out and blows Hitler's brains out.
Oh, whoa.
And then it basically stops and it says, well, what led to this decision? And the book is a phenomenal dive into behavior. And it looks at every chapter is written in a sort of uh, reverse chronological order. So when you pull the trigger, or again in the anecdote of him killing Hitler, there's that milliseconds. Those are milliseconds and seconds. Those are neurotransmitters. So chapter one will be seconds before. Chapter two will be minutes or hours before, and that'll look at the hormones. The next chapter will be weeks or months before, or years before, and that'll look at the social influences. Then it'll say like centuries before, and that'll look at the evolutionary processes that led to this kind of decision of of all these things, of why use a gun, of why go to Hitler, why, that's an obvious one, of course. And it's really fascinating because it reminds you that there's so many different ways in which you can analyze a single behavior. And to look at only one is missing far more than what you're getting. And can people be positive in the grand majority of life's tribulations? Yes, with absolute certainty they can. But how they manifest that positivity is based on so many different factors, including cultural factors, by the way. In for example, someone who is widowed in a society where the where the mother is very dependent on the father, or the wife is very dependent on the husband, might be might manifest quite differently than in a society where men and women are both seen as potential breadwinners, or in a society that very much values having lots of children. A woman who finds out that she's barren might be a deeply, deeply self erasing reality. Whereas someone who is, thinks about having a family and would like to have a child, um, but and then finds out that they can't, might react less negatively and might go towards adoption or try and think of other sort of facets. So again, the way in which we experience life is rooted in so many different individual components by themselves, and then they interconcatenate, they influence each other. So you have obviously the genetic aspect of it, which is by itself um, extremely impactful. Then you have the prenatal development. Then you have the development, which all of your schemas or mental maps of the world are developed at that time, including language. And language isn't just the sounds you utter to express things, but rather what those expressions mean, what they're surrounded by, what the word love means, what the word wrath means, or survive. Um, if you're from a ethnicity where your people have almost been wiped out, survive might have a very, very complex, familial, anecdotal, cultural, musical definition. Whereas if you're from a culture that or ethnicity that never experienced such a thing, you might not have such a not that you might, you definitely don't have that aspect. So it in order to answer any sort of question about how people can do things, of course you have to align certain um, uh, perspectives simultaneously. But there are general patterns. There are general predictors, like having social support. So if you have any sort of idea that you are slipping, that you are descending into increased anxiety, or descending into the just the that quicksand of depression, being aware that finding some sort of piece of meaning while you're still uh, above the surface enough to have the activity to start you know full, preparing your life in such a way that when the wave hits, you are as fortified as possible. These are things that people can absolutely do, and so we do these things naturally, and we're built to survive. So we do seek enjoyment. We do, of course, seek pleasure, as long as we're not negotiating with our health too much in the process of that pleasure. Um, we do seek friendships, of course, and not just novel friendships, but to ensure that our current friendships are healthy. So we do these things already, but to be mindful that if life is about to get very difficult, and it doesn't have to be like a natural disaster. It could be that you're about to start grad school and it is an extremely difficult, um, it's going to be an extremely difficult program, or that you're about to start a job that you're not very excited for, but it's something that you kind of have to do. Arming yourself with these kind of things would be the smartest decision that you could possibly make. And it doesn't make it so you don't gain the strength from having endured through something. But what it does do is help ensure that you don't sink so low as to not bounce back, which is that's what resilience is. As the very word resilience comes from rebounding upwards. So without those mechanisms, without those decisions beforehand, it'll be very difficult for you to bounce back, especially if you're so busy with your difficulties and your challenges and your burdens that you can't actively seek that new form of meaning, or that old form of meaning, or that friendship, or what positive emotions you want to um, reinforce in your life.
Yeah, yeah. It's so important to have that background, to have those experiences, because it shapes us so much. Because I was blessed to have this positivity in my friends that help show me the way, that help shape me who I
Yeah,
am.
temperament. Your
It's huge.
temperament is definitely a part of it, and
Yeah.
that's. I mean, that's natural. That's innate. That's something that's
Yeah.
from you. But people can push against that.
Yeah.
So the people around you maybe will say, Matt, why are you so like positive all the time? No, like that sucks. You didn't do a good job. Da-da. And they reinforce this negativity. So
Hmm.
you're not comfortable being your
Yeah.
positive self. And if you don't use something, it atrophies. And these traits like optimism or pessimism or extroversion or introversion, they can atrophy too. Someone who's extroverted but is constantly being bullied and teased, that that affects them just as terribly
Yeah.
in a different way than an introvert, but it still impacts them terribly, especially because they are seeking that relationship.
And I think by if because I've had people ask me those questions before. I've had many people ask me those questions where like, why are you so positive, and try to like damper upon my experiences in a negative way. And I think it's so important you have to separate yourself from those people because it could really impact the growth that you've achieved. Like if you've achieved so much in your mental state, it could dampen upon it. Like I've had people like tell me certain things I thought that were kind of offensive. Like when I was gaining my weight back, I was 121 pounds after I had my first surgery, my colon removed. It was the first time I went out on Halloween, and I had someone come up to me at the bar and say like, "Oh, like I said my weight," and they're like, "Oh, like I wish I was your weight." And I was like,
what a what
"No."
a
I'm like, "No, you
what a
don't."
ridiculous
I'm like, "No, you don't." And then someone
what a ridiculous thing to say.
And then I had someone say to me like, "Oh, I wish I was 101 pounds," and I was like, "No, you don't. You do not." And that's like where I think like a lack of
You
perspective.
were you were I'm assuming, yeah, of course. You were at a bar probably where people were
Yep.
drinking alcohol, and when you drink alcohol, you don't really think of
Yeah.
your ability to think of consequences has
Yeah.
diminished greatly.
And
Uh,
and even sober
so
people have said this
yeah,
to me too, where I'm like, and I remember I'm like, "No, you
that's
don't. Like, you can't." And that's where like you reinforce yourself with the experience that you had, and like you reinforce like by saying like how what type of an impact it was, but say in a way where you can like teach someone. I think it's a good teaching opportunity to kind of say like, this is kind of what happened to me, so they have a better perspective, because I think a lot of the times it's a
but
lack of
that can be
perspective.
exhausting.
It is exhausting.
But that can be exhausting if you're
Yeah.
doing it if everyone around you is misinterpreting and calling you a pioneer weight loss expert. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's not what's, I mean, we don't just want to be appreciated as human beings.
Yeah.
We want to be appreciated for what we want to be appreciated
Hmm.
for. It's a very, very important distinction.
Yes.
Just, if you want to prove that, you have the knowledge of a particular subject and everyone's just like, oh, they're smart. That doesn't achieve the same result
Yeah.
as someone recognizing your ability and whatever it is that you're trying to
Yeah.
achieve in. Um, and there's a term for this, by the way, in habit formation. There's a few people who've written about habit, and when you said remove the people in your life that are essentially causing those kind of negativities, uh, or who are questioning the things that you're using to push forward. Um, and it's removing frictions. It's creating a frictionless environment. So when you're creating a new habit, the friction would be something that makes it difficult to sort of habituate. So, for example, if someone who is um, trying to no longer drink alcohol, for example, they're trying to abstain from alcohol. Instead of driving home past that bar where they throw a few back with their friends, instead, they take another route. Now, the bar passing by and the many associations and their mind suddenly activating, and oh no, I could really use a drink. Oh man, I wonder if that friend, the bartender, like all these different ideas in your head. Now your brain, part of your brain, is already drinking. It's already doing it. So removing those we'll call them those triggers, or those, to use a less redefined word, because trigger now means a few things. Fewer cues to push that kind of habits, it is analogous to what you're describing. Fewer cues to negate the multivarious positive mechanisms you're using to propel forwards through this very difficult um, negative momentum, which in your case was an actual pathology, an actual sickness.
Yeah, you can't. It's hard to deal with that at times, and that's what I've kind of learned. If you go along with a quote that really, after I went through my journey, that's has become one of my favorite quotes now is our attitude towards life determines life's attitude towards us.
Oh, that's
I,
beautiful.
yeah, it was from someone that told me, a friend of mine, and it became my favorite quote because I I chose to have a positive outlook. And because I can learn, because like I said before, I learned from it and I grew from it, but it can also be a really good teaching moment in which it makes me feel good about myself. I, in my life, feel really good about giving my knowledge about what I've learned. And I think that could be really good for others because I see what it can do. And I chose to have this attitude of which teaching and showing others my life of what it's like to have a J pouch without a colon. And it provides this good. Like I've gotten messages from other people and it shows a positive outlook. They're starting to say, thank you for showing me this. My son's getting a J pouch. There's someone
Wow.
says to me, thank you for showing this video. I felt insecure about having an ostomy bag. And it just shows like because of having this positive attitude, it's showing a positive result. And that positive result is showing a better impact on other people and their mental health as well. So it's kind of spreading. It's like a spread of goodness. And that's where it promotes this happiness. And I wouldn't say happiness actually, hope. And I think that hope is so important for those who went through what I went through because it shows you're going to be okay and it can help other people's psychology and mental health as well. I think that's so vital. And so, but if you come across other negative people and it goes against that wave, it's not going to help you. So that's why you need to like learn from others and be surrounded by those who are going to support you and be there for you. Those were the people that were
And of course, having that pushback every now and then
yeah,
forces you to kind of reconsider exactly how your positive mechanisms are working. I mean,
yes,
but overall, if you're surrounded by people who are weighing down the very things you're using to survive and
yeah,
to push forward, that's where things become we'll call it socially pathological.
yes.
And you should excise those people from your life.
Yeah. And it doesn't happen. It's happened so rare. And I'm not saying I get it often at all. It's extremely rare if I get a type of comment like that. It's only happened like a few times and it's not bad. But it's good to teach with those moments. And you teach and you learn. And that's the best thing to do.
This is exactly what you're doing, though. You're spreading positivity, and perhaps more important than blind positivity, just insight.
Yeah.
Insight that this is like, hey, I had got that nightmare you're about to walk into. I'm on the other side of that, and here's what worked for me. Here's what seemed like it was going to work, but it did not work.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. Because, even though I didn't feel a lot of, there were times I did feel, you know, I did feel anxious at like very rare, but it was towards more afterwards. But I think throughout this whole journey, as long as I can give back, that's what matters to me. And so far it's working, which is I'm very happy about. And as long as people get, as long as you help someone and put a smile on someone's face and you tell someone's gonna be okay after seeing someone who's going through what I went through, that's all that matters to me at the end of
That
the
it's
day.
gonna be okay.
That it will be
Yeah.
okay. That's going to be okay. If you have the right care and the right support system, you will be okay.
Matt, thank you so much for this.
Sam, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Before I let you go, can you tell the listeners how to find you?
You can find me on Instagram and on TikTok with my handle Matty Bowles on both TikTok and Instagram. So you can find me there. You find my content and see how we're living life with no colon. We're still rolling.
Wow, that's amazing.
I didn't come up with it. I
Oh
didn't come
my
up with
God,
it.
that's phenomenal.
Did not come up with it at all.
I'm
Can't
gonna
take credit.
I'm gonna tell everyone you did.
Please, please do it. Always love it.
Matt, again, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for listening. Again, this is INNERVERSAL. This is our very first podcast, and each episode is going to be using psychology to look at another field or to look at another topic. So it'll always be psychology and something. And Matthew, once again, thank you for making our first episode, Psychology and Gut Health.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate you as always. Take it easy.